Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. And the second hour is usually something we'd like to spend a little bit more time on. Today, Sam Kakaiko from Zoom will be here talking about Zoom events and Zoom conferences. We're really excited to have him. So we're going to really be able to talk to the expert in this area and get your questions answered, and maybe some of your answers questioned. Tomorrow we have, of course, education. And that we don't put that on YouTube, so we'll have that at 8 o'clock. 10 o'clock, we're going to be cooking with Damayanti Gajar again, and we're really excited about it. Spicy. It's going to be garam masala spicy scrambled eggs. I'm very excited about it. And also, it's again a research in camera setups and how do we interactively learn together. So, and remember that also Friday afternoon we're doing at 2 o'clock. We're doing more of the Isadora labs, which have turned out to be really good. so stay tuned for that. And then finally on Saturday at noon, we're going back to Belfast, back to the Accidental Theater, and taking over the Accidental Theater, taking over the lights, taking over the audio, taking over the switcher from all over the world. We're going to be using the Belfast method to take that over, and it should be pretty exciting. So definitely check that out tomorrow. And Bill, let's go ahead and take it away.
Okay, we have an interesting one. Guy Cochran pops in, and although he's not there, he's spilling the tea on the fact that it is Doug Ferguson, longtime panelist and good friend of ours' birthday. So I don't know what we're going to do to...
Oh, wait, Doug's not on the panel?
He's not on the panel.
He was just here. He escaped at the last second.
Okay, we can't say to him he's not on the panel, so we can just wave to him, though. You have to be on the panel to be sung to. Okay, here we go. There we go. There we go. We'll give him a wave, but you can't leave. You can't leave and not. We need to be here.
He's at a gig.
Oh, got it. Okay. So being sung, having birthday sung to you while you're at a gig would be awkward. Yeah. All right, but happy birthday, Doug. It's good to have you there. We're just going to wait. If you show up over the weekend, we're just going to catch you when you least expect it and pounce on you and sing happy birthday in the horrible way that we do. All right, next question.
We're moving on into Mitchell Hill's first question from Wilmington, Delaware. He's here in the panel, and he's asking, thinking of using a large flat panel screen as a background, looks like 85-inch would do the trick. Which display technology would be best for reducing moire, OLED or LED?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Well, if you absolutely want to get rid of any sort of moire, there's two ways of doing it. First is use a projector. Secondly, make sure that the background is out of focus. Now, the moment you go out of focus on your camera by shortening your depth of field, the pixel size on your background no longer matters because it's out of focus. It's blurring each dot on the screen across multiple pixels on your sensor. So that's all you've got to do. Just go out a little bit out of focus and get rid of the noise, which comes from the pixels being too small on the background for the size of the pixel on the sensor.
Go ahead, Courtney.
You probably generally don't have to worry about moire unless your monitor is closer than full frame, unless you're less than full frame. If it's in the background, the entire monitor is within the background. You should, even if you're on the same resolution camera as a 4K resolution screen, you shouldn't have to worry about moire. And like Stuart says, if it's anywhere out of the focus plane, it will be blurry enough not to have moire issues. Now, if you're going to zoom in on it, or if you have it right up against the back of your head and you're only seeing about a quarter of it, then you have to worry. And I'd go with an OLED if you can afford it, because you get better blacks. But OLEDs, 85 inches, I don't think they're available, but maybe they are. They're extremely expensive, though.
Go ahead, Chris.
QLED.
Chris? Yeah, we talked about this a little bit on After Hours yesterday, Mitchell. But for everybody else, what you're going to end up with, in my experience, is playing with the lighting on your subject so that you can change the f-stop. And that's the easiest way to throw the background out of focus. So what I would do is frame the shot, set the f-stop until your background goes just out of focus and you do lose the moire. And I've actually seen moire on a full frame image behind a 4K camera and a 4K whatever. And then you have to play with the actual lighting levels.
So I've owned an insert studio for a couple of years that had an LED wall, had an LED screen behind it. There's a couple things you want to think about when you put an LED screen behind there. Number one is you can still blur the image, but have moire because it's the actual LED photo sites that are actually creating the moire, not the actual image itself. So the image isn't moire, the actual photo sites are. So if they get into focus, you're going to see moire. And so you do need to shorten the depth of field, or you can simply move it back a little bit further from the subject and then zoom in further. So as you zoom in, of course, you're compressing your image, and that means you get the same framing, but you can have a slightly smaller aperture. So in my experience when putting especially people who are not used to this in front of an insert studio is you really want to sit at about a 5.6. Now that may seem like a really closed down place to be because a lot of us live at 2.8 or something like that. But at a 5.6, it means people have a good solid 9 to 12 inches of play in what they're doing. But to do that, you're going to need to move that background, the monitor back a little bit. And then to get the monitor to be full frame, you now need to pull the camera back and then zoom in a little bit. So the throw becomes a little bit longer. So what our throws were often, 10 to 12 feet. To the subject, and then another 2 to 3 feet back to the screen. And we found that worked actually pretty well. I wouldn't recommend OLEDs, and the reason for that is they burn in. And so you just want LEDs because they tend not to burn in, or they don't burn in as badly. But that's another piece of that. You will, if you're going to do this often, having it motorized, having a hydraulic control over the height of it, super useful. Like because you're going to have different people at different heights, and being able to move that in. We got to a point where we had the screen was on a moving part, the seat was on a moving part, the table was on a moving part, and the camera was on what's called a hot pod that we could move up and down. What that allowed us to do is within minutes make adjustments to the height of how all of those things interrelate, because in reality the camera always wants to be just a little higher than the person. So the person's a little taller, you want to bring the camera up, and then now you've created a whole new set of problems because the camera, for most people, looking up just a little bit is good for their chin. So anyway, so those are little things that you want to think about as you do it. So people have a tendency to leave it where it is, but then you get tall people looking down and they get double chins, and then they never want to see that video again. So anyway, and they don't come back. So anyway, those are the things you want to think about from an insert studio. They are super useful, super powerful when you do them. The final thing is the images in the background matching the focal length of the camera. So once you get that camera locked in and once you get that lens, we literally take that camera off and we go shoot our background scenes with the camera focus set at the right area, same lens, same height measured, same rotation. When you match those up, and then what we did is we went around and shot in the areas. Sometimes we shoot in if we're doing it at a corporate location, we'll literally go out and shoot around the campus. And it's great because you can have people walking back and forth and do all kinds of other things. And you can create these great scenes, and it just looks like they're sitting in their campus in a place that you could never sit in the campus because of sound and everything else. And so anyway, that's some things to think about with that. Next question.
Guy Cochran is back from Seattle with another one. NDI Bridge, how can it help us?
George?
Right now I'm having, Chirag is going to build me a few Zoom machines on AWS, and I think I'm going to have him load Bridge on all of them. I think it's a good time to start experimenting with the technology to see what I could push from here at home to the cloud. So I think it's going to be a new workflow to add to the system.
And George, you're coming in really low. So just, I don't know if something changed between mic checks. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I was hoping Preto was throwing him a softball, but he chose to just let it go by him. So
I thought you'd bring me into this one.
Come on, Preto. Talk.
Yes, Mr. Preto.
So we ran a little bit of an experiment. I was sharing my giant desktop, which is 3K by something, and it was going really slow, about a frame a second. But Guy seems to think that my video from my Brio was 30 frames per second. And what resolution was it, Guy? Did you notice?
I believe we had the settings at the standard 8 megabit, so it was 1920 by 1080 HD. I later went on to do some tests in the cloud and cranked it up to ultra at 24 megabit, and it looked really, really good, and it was full frame. That was actually 60 frames per second. So it's amazing. Like I could see all the NDI sources on John's network. So you just launch a simple app and you host. Well, I did have to pop open the port. So it was like port 5930. So I had to pop open that port. So you do need a little bit of experience there if you have a firewall that's blocking, or a router that's blocking those ports. But very interesting technology, because not only did he see my stuff, but he was able to control my PTZ camera from Vegas.
So my only point, real quick, Alex, is for a consumer having them do all that, having them download the app and try to open up a port in their routers be almost impossible. But from pro to pro, it looks really good.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely have to do some experimentation there. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're interested in learning more about NDI Bridge, John Mahoney on his Streaming Alchemy YouTube channel, he's going to do a demo this afternoon and show everybody how the software works. So it's 2:00 Eastern time on the Streaming Alchemy YouTube channel.
And by the way, if you're trying to watch this on the phone on the test stream that I believe I posted, did we post the link to the test stream? It looks amazing. Like it looks broken on my iMac because it's SDR, but I think I've tuned in the HDR to something that looks actually really good. Anyway, so I would highly recommend it if you have something an HDR display, and I think that we've might have cracked some of the code there. Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael's up next. Frequent questioner. As you work with a lighting design, what tools help you make sure you're not overloading your camera sensor and that skin tones and the like are rendered accurately?
Sorry, I was on the wrong. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I use a Smart Scope Duo 4K, and it seems to work pretty well.
Go ahead, Stuart.
For myself out on location, I like to use all the waveform monitors on my Shogun or on my DP4 monitor on the camera. Histogram for like the average brightness across the entire, you want a lovely bell curve on that and you get reasonably good exposure. But yeah, waveform monitors over and over again. When it comes to working in the field, I never trust a field monitor, because if somebody's bumped it or if the color's drifted and it hasn't been checked in a while, the waveform will tell you accurate information, even if the screen itself is off.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
I'm a little bit old school, back to a lighting meter to start with, because you got to know what the intensity is of your light in to match it as you're going around. Color temperature is very important, so make sure you're not mixing color temperatures if you want good looking flesh tones. After that, when you get into the camera, you can zebra patterns are wonderful to make sure you're not overexposing the sensor. False color to tell you the range of the sensors that you're exposing. And then certainly all the waveform meters and stuff to make sure the signal you're pulling out the back end is good.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, I was going to mention false color because it's a relatively modern way to look at a picture and decide what your luminance values are and things. And most of them are set up so that if you're seeing bright yellow, it's at 100%. If you're seeing a pink tone, that is normally where you put flesh tones, 70%, sometimes 80, sometimes 60. It's often settable on the better false color monitors. But I find that to be a really useful tool in the field for making sure my exposures are where I want them.
Go ahead, next question.
Robert McHale in Dallas, Texas is up next. And Robert says, how do you like to take a break from technology? And do you do it on a regular basis? Excuse me.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm an avid hiker, and I love to ride my bike. I'd say I do it about 5 miles a day.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, for me, I do amateur photography, and I like to just get out to unfamiliar or familiar places and just kind of wander around for a few hours. Also have an electric bike that I do with my wife.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Play with cats.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
She's asleep over there.
Yosemite used to have absolutely no terrible cell service in the valley. Unfortunately, that's changed, but the beach is where I mostly hang out.
Good, Courtney.
I just get up and go for a walk for about a mile or two, and I make sure I take my phone with me, but it stays in a pocket. I do not listen to anything, and I use no electronic devices while walking, and it's important to keep your gaze on the horizon or far away because it will help you keep you from getting headaches from looking at those screens all day.
Good, Michael.
I'm sure you guys can relate, but when working in audio and you're working on a song for an 8-hour day, it gets very monotonous and you're just tired and from hearing the same thing. Closing your eyes, taking a break, and of course, a little Beethoven seventh is awesome.
I go with Sky.
I'm not very good at this, so I thank you, Rupert, for asking. But I do trim the trees in my backyard, the fruit trees, which is kind of a learning process for me. But also, I have a recent grandchild, so I'm trying to get out of my technology focus. But there is a FOMO of what am I missing? And so thank you for encouraging this.
Go ahead, George.
A nice long drive on a winding road with some Bob Marley, and you have to focus on the road. So that's what I like to do.
I cook, so that's my thing. Which is why the cooking thing makes sense to me. But I have a lot of cookbooks that I'm slowly working through, trying to figure out how to do what I'm doing. Next year I'll be farming, so that'll be the next as I slowly prepare for retirement. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, it'll take me 20 or 30 years to get good at it. But to return to it, my goal though is that there'll be some point where I finish my life the way I started it, which is all on a farm. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next, and he says, would there be any sort of manager or mentoring support agency for freelance professionals in our industry to handle finding clients and managing business matters?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, at the high level, there's quite a bit of creative artist agencies. Those actually do handle editors. And so if you're doing a network television show or something along those lines, you definitely may have an agent. You will get pigeonholed. I have a former student who can do a fast-paced cop show, and they will not let him edit other things other than fast-paced cop shows. And he's done NYPD Blue and Psych and all those type of things. But on the lower end, it's, you can look up, there's all kinds of things, upvote, internet relationships, that kind of stuff that'll help you get jobs. But it's always networking.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, exactly. There's I guess the whole union side of things, which I'm not going to comment on. But if you are freelance, it's important to also remember that basically means self-employed, and that involves some self-management. You can bring in people to help you with that, or get involved in groups. But you have to remember that some of that responsibility, remains with you. Business matters. You can go to people for that. Things like finance and insurance. It's important to get good relationships there with people who can guide you, and not let yourself be misguided. And maybe there are also agencies and umbrella companies that you can look at. That may be helpful if you want to work in particular regions, if you are otherwise just freelance. And some of these, there are networking groups out there, or community groups, peer groups, like office hours, of course. And but there are some so-called networking groups that exist for no other purpose other than networking itself. And some of those can waste a little bit of your time. So just watch out that if you do get involved in groups, that they are providing you with value.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, in this business, there is this sort of necessary evil called event planners that it's helpful to know. I wouldn't say that a lot of them are going to be mentoring or supportive, but if you get in good with a few event planners that really help your business, and they will help you grow. When I first got into my streaming business, somebody tried to hook me up with basically what is a door opener, and that is just somebody who has a lot of connections, and you pay them a monthly fee, like a retainer, and their job is basically to introduce you to people to networking groups that will help you get your business out.
Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington up next. With cryptocurrency prices hitting all-time highs, are we seeing AWS GPU instances becoming sparse and vMix in the cloud becoming a non-starter?
Go ahead, Stuart.
What Guy's specifically talking about is people spinning up AWS instances to use the virtual machines to do all the calculations for creating their Bitcoins. The problem with that is twofold. Firstly, AWS or Amazon itself will look at the bandwidth and go, who are we actually supporting as customers? Where do we get our income from? And they will either scale up or down the amount of instances that are available for Bitcoin mining, and they will police it pretty stringently. The other thing is they will be doing a bit of it themselves, because it's an easy way to just have any system that's not in use be actually earning money for them, which is they're already paying for the power. They might as well use the processing. So yes, as the bandwidth gets hogged by these things, they will scale it back. And yes, until they get that balanced, things like vMix and anything else that you want to run in the cloud will suffer. But again, they will find their balance as they go forward with it.
I have, because the GPU resources are constrained. They're not something they can just turn on the way that they do CPU resources. I have talked to folks that there is a number, and I don't know what that number is. Everyone's kind of cagey about what that number is, that where it makes more sense, it makes sense to do it in AWS. And so anytime Bitcoin gets above that and the cost of that production is below that inside of AWS, to your point, Guy, the GPUs get saturated because people know what that number is, and no one will tell me what it is. So like it's like, that's like a little secret, but it's somewhere in that, that range that we're seeing now, where they'll start trying to book up all of the stuff. But that's a mathematical equation of how much does it cost to create a Bitcoin versus how much is it selling for right now. And a lot of them are actually trying to flip those relatively quickly so that they can make sure to get return on their investment. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'm just hearing of some productions that they weren't able to spin up. So they're a couple hours away from the show starting, and the machine won't start. There's no reserved instances. So there's instances that you turn on. You have your allocation, but unless you reserved it and you paid for it, you don't get it. And so you're at the mercy of going to a different data center. So what some people are doing now are they're spinning them up early, so they're having to pay another day worth of time just to keep that instance on and lock it up. Because once you have it spun up, it's yours. But it's that thing of spinning one up and crossing your fingers. So it's best to have a couple data centers. So the way you do it is you ask. You actually have to ask for allocation. So something to look out for, because we're seeing more and more people getting burned by it.
Yeah. I mean, this does get back to why I tend to not go, I want to do everything in the cloud. There's a little bit of a, I get concerned about constrained resources. Go ahead, John.
My understanding was it's against their terms and conditions to do mining on AWS. And I know there's some specific GPUs that have been disabled for mining for this particular reason.
Yeah, it could be. Still people being against the TOS and not doing it are two different things. Next question.
Guy Cochran's right back from Seattle with what's new with DJI, the drone folks.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Well, forget about the Mavic 3. It's just an evolution of what's been there before, although there are some questions about the fisheye cameras for object avoidance, and if they stick out far enough that they'll get scratched on landing. But Guy, what I really want to hear more about is DJI doing a microphone system. That sounds like it'll be very interesting.
Go ahead, Courtney.
That does sound interesting. Yeah, I was just going to mention what he just mentioned, the Mavic 3, which is just out, and it does shoot ProRes, which is new.
Only one of them does.
Yeah, only.
So the Cine, which is like $5,000, shoots the ProRes.
There's that, and then of course there's the Ronin new 4D, which I know Alex is drooling about.
I have to admit, I really want both of those. Anyway, so go ahead, George.
So it's a nice update as far as the cameras go, but obviously, if you read all the chatter this morning, there's a lot of pushback because folks feel like they're not really innovating. They're just doing these micro updates, and then the price is now $5,000 for the Cine. But great update, as mentioned, 5.1K Apple ProRes. So decent update, but I don't think everyone is going to jump it and buy it. If you have $5,000 to blow, go for it.
Okay, go ahead, Stuart.
Just the point there that George made. DJI are kind of like Volvo. They don't do revolutions, they do evolutions. They take the small steps, the safe steps to make sure they're good products every time, rather than, say, trying to fit a V8 into a Volvo. Yeah, you could do it, but do you get a great product out of it or not? And they always need to be making a great product.
Yeah. I feel like there's a handful of companies that we're just seeing hitting on all of their cylinders. Like there's just this, like everything they come out with. And again, it is not people who think that companies aren't innovating fast enough that are producing new products haven't done that before. Like the people who complain about that, who say that, oh, they're not progressing fast enough, are users, not people who actually make the products. Because making the products means that you figure out an evolution. You figure out, we could do this year, but we have to stretch it out over the next 2 or 3 years because we have to amortize the cost of this new technology with this new technology with this new, cash flow is everything, and you can't just do a breakneck speed at every release because you can't recoup the cost of R&D to go back into that. And so when you see people talk about that on just like, okay, and I have to say that the DJI stuff has gotten, it's amazing. They're really I feel like the new Ronin 4 has a game changer, as far as a camera system. It just completely, like, we're going to do something completely different. Like it has completely reorganized what cameras should be. And I have to admit, as someone who is in the market right now for a solid, drone, I was glad this one came out so I can think about it, because I was getting very close to getting it Inspire. so I think that this is it's pretty exciting. We're going to look at it a little closer. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back in with in a post about Google's hybrid approach, and he has a link there. The CEO says coming together is a reason to return to the office. Could methods like the Belfast Mobley method or something in there that we're doing bring teams together virtually?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think things like the Belfast and Mobley, I think those are premium examples of how those experiences could be improved for remote teams. I think in a lot of cases, there are also more simple things that can be done to improve those experiences. A lot of people in the middle there are probably not having even great experiences just with basic meetings. This is another look on the debate between, that working remotely works for some people or is possible for some people, maybe not for others. It's the same old thing. But in the middle there is, some people who could be doing a better job, and some of the yearn to get back to the office is because maybe they're having poor experiences at home, and that could be improved by the simplest of things or the greatest of things like Belfast and Mobley.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I think since pandemic world, it forced people to try to collaborate remotely. And I think that that CEO may have to eat his own words, because I think people are more productive when they're working from home and they're collaborating. And thanks to applications like Zoom, it's allowed us to try it out, get our feet wet, and become comfortable doing it with our friends and our family. And now we're doing it with our offices and with webinars and what you're seeing right here. So I think that, yes, the answer to the question is that I think that's where we're evolving to. I think we're going to all be working mostly from home and collaborating electronically, and perhaps going into the office just to get fired.
Go ahead, Alex.
I think what's going to have to happen is that stockholders, shareholders are going to have to start asking what the liabilities are of these large companies when it comes to contracts with how much of their property where their offices are. In other words, when their contracts are coming up, if they're going to renew them, and it should be on the balance sheet, because obviously quite a lot of this stuff is about the fact that they've got these long-term contracts and arrangements for their offices, which they've built in the case of Apple and maybe Google. But on the other hand, maybe a nice team experience would be for people to offer something like the Belfast method, to say, look, there's somebody on the other side of the world, and when we want you as a team, and you're all over the world, we want you to organize make a video by cutting a performance live, and that can actually be a team building exercise.
Yeah, I think that I don't think that they have too much space. I've actually looked at this a little bit. I think that they just use it badly. The open office was a complete disaster. And this is part of people not wanting to go back to the office is not wanting to go back into the cattle, format that was open office. I mean, it was basically like cattle in a field, but in a very small field, like Coalinga in California, like with 40,000 cows inside of like 2 acres. And so I think that that's what it felt like. And anytime I was consulting and working in that environment, I just felt like I was cattle, and producing, bits. And so the thing is people don't want to go back to that. I think that if companies say, we're going to give you back your offices, we're going to give you a private space that you can have virtual meetings where you're not hearing everybody around you and you're not wearing headphones so that you can concentrate, you'd end up with a larger percentage of people that would want to go back to the office. What they don't want to do is go back to an office where they're packed in shoulder to shoulder. That's the real issue that they have. Is not, they can use the space, they just have to go back to a space that made sense, not a space that's dehumanizing.
I think that's partially that's HR using that to motivate people, saying, look, when you start here, you're going to have to be out amongst cramped in the field with all the other sheep or animals.
I think it's just
that's old-fashioned way of thinking, but I think they have to move on from that way of thinking for motivational sake.
I think it's how do we not spend too much money on people? So I think it's I don't know if it's trying to encourage them as much as it is just like we're cheap. Anyway, so go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, on another level, it still is hybrid no matter what, and so you're going to have the inside looks and inside jokes in the room versus whatever setup. That particular setup looks pretty good because the screens are big and everything, but also everyone in those screens are like, they did it right, which is probably not going to be the case in general. And so you still are going to have that hybrid element where you do feel separated. I don't think it works very well, honestly, still, when you mix too many things like that.
And one of the reasons that I think that everyone should have their own space, whether it's at home or in an office, is so they can do what we're doing in after hours. In after hours, we have basically the largest global water cooler ever, where people are able to they're able to appear, disappear, they can talk or just listen. They can have all those controls are there, but that only works in an environment where people are either in their home office or they're in an office that actually has some level of privacy. Go ahead, Rupert, real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I absolutely agree with Alex that HR are going to either have to catch up with this sooner or later if they haven't already. But just remember that we're talking about going back to the office about companies that already exist. Don't forget there are companies forming today, tomorrow, who will never have office space.
That's been happening. Yeah. And to your point, for 5 years, 10 years, there's companies that are just forming without any office at all. I work at a company that has never had an office, so it just, we have an office now, we have a technical office, but before what we built because we needed a bunch of technical resources, there was no center. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the only thing that really they kind of lose control of if they go to a hybrid situation is security. And when people are if they're working on sensitive stuff, media companies that are, editors that are working on unreleased films and things like that, they worry a lot about the stuff getting out into the real world. They don't really have a control over your workspace at home, so they don't know what's going on there. So that's an issue.
Although we've produced an awful lot of movies now without that. What we found when I was working at Lucasfilm was that the security really came down to the people. Do you trust the people to keep it secure or not? And it had less to do with the technology or the position of location of people, but more of whether they were treating it as important data or not. Next question.
Moving on, the next one comes from somebody named Alex L. in Nevada, California, and it's hard to read because it just says, "Has anyone seen these videos?" And then there's a link there. Alex,
I did exactly after I sent it. I was like, I did exactly what I told everyone not to do, which is I didn't give any context at all. I said, just look at this video. Go ahead, Jason. So for those of you listening, it's a video of a woman has done some of the most amazing math videos. This is really for math for graphic art or for animators and for people working on games. And it is, just stunningly high quality. I'm kind of stunned that someone did something at this level. It's right up there with the 2 blue, 3 brown animations. I think, is that right? I can never remember the name of that one perfectly. Go ahead, Jason.
I personally, first, I loved the animation of this. It absolutely blew me away. But Dave Castillo's algorithm is something I use a lot in design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, and I got mesmerized by it too. I think just from a practical sense, I've always had difficulty with doing math just for math's sake. Yeah. There's what's called pure math, where people, they'll do the pure math, and oftentimes there's a practical application that's found with it. But just having that payoff of seeing instantly how the math is turning out is pretty fascinating and motivating.
And the animations are just amazing. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I was introduced to this concept in Illustrator when it first came out. Now, I think the debate is, how do you pronounce? Is it Bezier? That's the Bezier. Well, okay, that's a corporate. We've all gotten together, but the other.
You're breaking up, Sky. Someone turned on the microwave at Sky's house. Oh, we can't hear you, Sky.
And she's got E5.
Yeah, Sky, we lost you there. So what I'm gonna see if we can reach out to her to see if we can get a second hour. So I think that we need to figure out a way to have her talk about like what her process is, because it's kind of an amazing, it's not just that it's great cogent math, descriptions. This is when I think about like what is the future of education, I feel like all math should look like that. like all math instruction should look like that, and then we can ask questions about what that looks like. It's just amazing. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back with, what is the role of the AJA FSHDR in the Office Hours 2.0 system, and is it controlled by Universe or Isadora?
Right now, the FSHDR that we're using at the moment is just to convert the 709 to HDR. So we're converting it. Today, we're converting to HDR10. Yesterday, we were doing HLG, which was not successful. The HDR10, I have to tweak with the Max CLL and the Max Fall, and I think I got it right today. So even other than my forehead looking really shiny, a lot of these look really good. So we're doing that transformation in the FSHDR now. What we were talking about yesterday, it opened up a conversation of what could we do. And so we've got 4 other FSHDRs, or one other FSHDR and 3 other FS4s. What we're looking at doing is basically pumping all of the panelists through those and essentially being able to color correct every single person on the fly. Now, we're not controlling it with Universe or Isadora yet, because we are because right now I'm just controlling it in the control interface, and there's tons of dials that you don't need. So one of the things we're talking about is the idea of abstracting the need for all those dials into the FSHDR and simply build a Universe interface that's using the REST API to basically talk back to the because it's all REST inside of the FSHDR. So we could build an interface inside of Universe to allow us to do the color correction, so that you just open up a page, and literally because of Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC, we know who it is. They can just say, I just need to correct Courtney. I don't need to figure out what input or what HDR it's on. It's just Courtney. And then I just sit there and change Courtney's color as needed, or whatever I need to do there. And so one of the other things that we're looking at also, we started talking about, is the idea of being able to manage sync through either the FSHDR or the 806, both of which could be controlled through Universe. So, and then the next thing we were talking about was the idea that we could probably build an automated way that people could pick up an iPhone or their phone or their whatever and literally point it at the screen, and we could automatically drive their sync. I think we're kind of sorting out a way to do that. I have it sorted around in my head. I'm going to build a test over the weekend, and we'll see if we can get it working. But we may be able to have something that someone can literally lift up and just put it next to their mic with the screen, and immediately would sync their audio and video in our hardware. So we're gonna work on that over next week. So this is the ongoing progression of 2.0 that we're working on. All right, next question.
Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina is up next, and he says, what are some good uses for strong magnets in and around the home office or studio?
Go ahead, Jason.
In my new studio, I have a series of shelves with mason jars, and I've put strong magnets on the bottom of the shelf so I could just stick a jar, and they fit pretty compactly, right nicely in there.
Go ahead, Rupert.
In my room here, I have some blackout curtains against the window, and of course the drywall going down the window's got edging strip behind the drywall, inside. So I'm able to use magnets on the curtains against the drywall to keep the curtains flush and tight against the wall.
Go ahead, Bill.
If you want to go beyond or hang things heavier than the standard paper on whiteboards that have a magnetic surface, I use the little tiny strong magnets as something to hold heavier things up there. They're really useful that way.
I build a whole sets with it. So I like literally build sets with 80/20 and rare earth magnets so that you can take the entire facade of a set and just snap it to the wall. So you just like literally pick it up and just go blink, and it just sticks, and shelving and windows and everything else just stick to the wall. It means that you can flip the wall without any tooling in a couple hours instead of a day or two. So if you're looking for that kind of thing, you can do it. But really, you just have to think about excuses to find your way to unitednuclear.com. You just got to find an excuse. That's all. Next question.
Moving into Robert Soji's next question from Los Angeles, California. And Robert says, can the panelists recommend a data recovery service that is more cost-effective than Drive Savers? Are any panelists experienced with OnTrack, Gilliware, or CBL data recovery services?
Go ahead, Jason.
My immediate thought is you really shouldn't mess with this, and you really should trust Drive Savers. That said, Steve Gibson's SpinRite works really well, assuming you can get the hard drive to mount, run it on level 2 if it's an SSD. Sometimes you'll even be able to run it on level 1 and get good results.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Exactly what Jason said.
Yeah, you only get to do this once. Just remember, like when you send it out, very rarely do you get to send it to someone to manage your drive and then send it to somebody else. Oftentimes whatever they do to get the data off the drive is the end of the drive. So you just got to be really, super careful. Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia, our friend, says, for the panel, what are the 2 must-have Stream Deck buttons?
George.
For the panel, Zoom. I have the front page built for Zoom, and also Mix Effects. Those are the 2 I have. I would say, Tony, is whatever app you're using or system you're using, like for instance the ATM, it's easy just to build your buttons out to correspond to what Blackmagic's layout is. And as far as colors, it'll be easy for you to be able to drive your system. So I would just say those 2 for office hours is just Zoom and Mix Effects.
Go, Jason.
I have one that's really handy that just shuts off all of my lighting, and I have another one that will do a sync lock between a Raspberry Pi and all the HyperDecks and all the switchers.
Next question.
Tony Mobley, right back from Noonan, Georgia, says, for those panel members who are using LinkedIn Live Broadcast, what streaming platform are you using with it? Restream, StreamYard, something else, and so forth?
Go ahead, George.
Restream is the easiest to go with LinkedIn.
Next question.
Moving on, Tony Nobley is back again, and this time he says, as the office hours continues to up the ante, embracing cutting-edge technology, is there a plan to recruit new members as the demand for current members continues to get busy with work?
Yes. I mean, there's always new members joining. So the thing is, there's a steady stream of people coming in, that are slowly, being added to the ranks. And there's a surprising number of people. I was talking to a friend of mine that is very, we're going to bring him on at some point. And he's like, oh yeah, I listen to it every day. He goes, I don't know what I would say if I got up there. I was like, oh, there's a lot you could say. So I think that, but I think that we're definitely kind of slowly building up. When we turn on the Office Hours 2.0 a little bit, there's going to be a lot of PR, and we won't worry about that as much. But I want to kind of, I'm still trying to manage growth speed to make sure that we're able to manage it in a way that keeps the culture that we've created intact. Next question.
Tim Holmes, San Lorenzo. Can the wrinkles be removed from those oval pop-up backgrounds as they age?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, and they're mostly fitted with a jersey knit or some type of spandex material that stretches out. So open them up, stretch them out, and then if you have any wrinkles, and there probably shouldn't be, but if you have left them folded up for a long time, maybe you'll have some. Use a hand steamer and steam out the wrinkles, but make sure it dries completely before you fold it back up and put it away.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'd also say that remember that lighting of your background is going to have an impact on how those wrinkles appear. It's just like lighting a person's face. If you use directional light that's hard from one side, it's going to make every crag in your face stand out with a little shadow. If you can do butterfly lighting or some kind of wide, big softbox, it's going to even out all that. And the same rules work with backdrops.
Next question.
Guy Cochran's up next from Seattle, and Guy says, with more and more professionals being invited to speak remotely, where would they go to look good and sound good? would there be insert, or where could insert studios flourish at a fraction of the price? Hotels, libraries, Kinkos, and so forth.
Go, Rupert.
I think I want to pick up on the libraries point here. Many of those places may have a lot of catching up to do, but the new ones being built today or tomorrow may, I think, be looking to provide this. I mentioned it here before. There's one of the local libraries here is spending $80 million on relocating and setting up a new facility. And in the strategy for that, they've definitely got in their presentation space for business entrepreneurs to do presentations and all that stuff. So I think they're going to get in on that. And I think co-working spaces too will eventually, and that may be coming up in the next question.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I think it's going to all come down to convenience. Where is it most convenience to have that ability to do an insert or participate? And I think we're kind of at that point now where everybody has the ability to pretty quickly and easily do a rather good quality interview or insert. In my particular case, I decided to build what I consider to be a high quality way to go in and do these kinds of interviews, and as a sort of a proof of performance. And in doing it, I've learned quite a bit, and also I ended up on office hours. So it's an interesting phenomenon, but I think that it doesn't have to be at a public facility or a big corporation that has the money to do it. I think it's coming down in price. Everybody can do it.
I think one of the things you want to look at is density. So we built a business model around this that was a little too early. So we spent a lot of time researching this specific problem. We looked at WeWork a lot, and we actually tried to pitch them on it, and they didn't get it at the time of using that. But co-working spaces are, we think, a really easy place because it's a high density of people who need it, who don't necessarily have the money to make that happen. And so there are people who are building, insert studios. The insert studios that exist are generally not what you need for what we're talking about. What you need to be able to do is create your own broadcast, like what we're doing here. And you need to be able to have theoretically a teleprompter, and you need to be able to play images, and you need to be able to have support. And potentially what you really want is those insert studios to be able to scale. So it's a simple insert studio that you can run by yourself, but it can also it has modular ability to clump onto a larger event. So now we want 8 of these facilities to have a unified event. So what I really need to do is be able to send talent to the 8 studios that are, one in Chicago and one in New York and one in London. And they're all, if you think about the mixture of the Mobley process and the Belfast method and all those things, you take over those studios. There's one technician in each studio. You take over those studios, you run them. They're all connected in the cloud, and they push out a unified event, to everybody else. So being able to tie them all in and have them all have the same, because right now it's not that way. The insert studios are just gobbledygook, and they haven't been invested in for years, and so they're usually not very good. And the ones that we see, we've actually interacted with a couple public institutions like libraries. The problem is they're talking to broadcast specialists who have no idea what they're doing, and so they're basically building something for the past already, and they're spending enormous amounts of money doing it. Let's put a Grass Valley switcher into it's insanity. And so a lot of this money, good money is being thrown out at bad projects right now. And so you want to think about those things. You got to think about the set is important. So either you have a screen that you put behind people, but that's why we started building sets with magnets, is because you want to flip that set all the time. You want to have I really believe in physical sets, and I've done, the green screen concept is okay, but I really have become super sensitive to people feeling like an authentic communication. If that green screen isn't absolutely spot on, it's got this subconscious, dehumanizing, doesn't look real in the same way that virtual backgrounds don't look real. Any problem with the edge. And it's not what people notice, it's how they feel. And they will feel different when that background doesn't match up perfectly, and so geeks think that that's great, and they make them, they want to believe that, and they kind of believe their way into that process, but it doesn't really work. It creates a less experience for the viewer. And so that's why we went into building physical sets, but we had to figure out how to flip them quickly. So using magnets allowed us to do that. And so you really want to think about those kinds of things. 20th and M, which is where our office was like a perfect example of a place you want to put one, which is where we had a studio, and we also had immense construction when we tried to launch it next to it. So you want to float it. It was a huge problem for us because we couldn't launch because they were pile driving right next to the building, and for the time that in our launch cycle, which it's quiet for 10 years, and then they're pile driving when you try to launch the studio. And so but it had 30 communication firms within 3 blocks. So it's 20th and M is and it's got fiber and everything else. It is the space, to do this in, and so that, but there's examples of that in every city, Chelsea in New York is extremely dense. There's different places, and those are the kind of places you want to look for to put your first ones, and then co-working spaces, and then just office buildings that are dense and somewhat near public transit. Anyway, that's what we looked at. Sorry, long answer. I've obviously thought about it just a little. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, up next with a report from Ernst & Young says consumers like streaming but still love to save money, and that 71% of surveyed consumers want to pay less than $25 for all of their streaming. How often might consumers swap around their streaming services?
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, as we were talking about either yesterday or the day before, media companies are actually valued by how many subscribers they have, and their long-term subscribers, and not how many you buy one thing. It's more about your long-term subscribers. But essentially, these things will change when you bundle and when you unbundle. We have in the last 4 or 5 years, we've had an unbundling process away from the cable bundle to these various streaming services, and it therefore follows the pendulum will swing back, and there will be a bundling process as well. It's just that you might not have something like ESPN, which everyone pays for, but only some people watch, because of course Disney charge ESPN to everyone because they have to have it for the people who definitely want it. So yeah, there'll be a rebundling process, and it'll just be one side versus the other. So you're not likely to have Disney with somebody else, but you're not likely to have Apple with Disney, but you may have HBO with whoever, Apple, who knows. So a rebundling process, I think, will happen.
Okay, Jason, real quick.
Make no mistake, Comcast knows that at some point, everything is going to be internet on TV. They know that, and they price accordingly. That's all I'm going to add.
Bill, real quick.
Yeah, the entry and exit is the thing that is stopping me from thinking this is going to take over. And that is, once you start a subscription, how do you get out of it? Can they make it easy, or do they start to make it harder because they want to keep the revenue and the headcount and all of those things that make Wall Street happy?
When you ask consumers what they want, my kids say they want things, and I always, my response is always, you know what I want? A pony. I want a pony. Like, you're asking consumers what they want. Oh, I want to pay less than $25. It's just like that's just it's like an absurd question. The bottom line is that we've been paying a lot more for cable for a long time. So I think it'll just be a matter of how good the services are, and people are going to slowly decide, oh, I'm not watching these very much. But this is also why people like me really want everything to go through Apple, is because it's easy for me to turn things off, which is why they don't want you to do that. It's easy for me to just go, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Next question.
George E. Kennedy Jr. here in the panel from Washington, D.C. What are your thoughts on the DJI Mavic 3 price tag Cine Premium Combo USD $4,999? We talked about that earlier, but any other ideas?
Go ahead, George.
We talked about it, but Alex, a quick question for you. So it's really interesting that you talked about the 4D camera and wanting to pick up one of those. And I think there's some really great use cases for it. And obviously a lot of DPs out there have pushed back on it. But I've just posted a video in the chat. There's a guy out of the EU that took one of the cameras and put it on a RC truck and sent it down a runway, an airport runway, to do camera moves. So I think there's going to be use cases for it. What are your thoughts? What do you really see this camera doing for you?
You're talking about the Mavic or the Ronin?
The Ronin, the overall scope of what you're trying to do. Because obviously there's folks doing things with it already. That's crazy.
I just think that the thing is that for 90% of the audience, 90% of people producing content, the Ronin, the Ronin 4 is going to do almost everything they need to do. And for that last 10%, you still need a Steadicam operator. And so for the top films and for really, really complex high-end commercials and everything else, you still need a specialist who understands how to do it. But I think that for 90% of the walking behind people, or doing corporate or education, or doing all these other, or travel videos and all these things that don't have a budget for someone like my brother to do a Steadicam, I think this thing is the thing. Like I will eventually buy one, and then I will use it for a lot of. I mean, I use the Osmos for opens and closes for shows for years. Like we just we would get to a location, and then we would shoot a bunch of stuff, but I would literally shoot it out of the car, and I'd walk up to things, and everything else is kind of like an entry way to do the video. And so just having something that stabilizes, this just takes it to an entirely different level. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Douglas Carmichael again, and he asks, what tools would enable maximum flexibility when designing a Belfast first lighting system? Would using lights like the ETC Source 4 LED range that can be adjusted via DMX be a good start?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, certainly DMX is going to be the standard that most people are going to sign up to remotely or otherwise. I probably wouldn't go with the Source 4s. They're a little bit too much focused light. I would go with a softer light to start with and then build in Source 4s for detail later.
Next question.
Stephen Fisher in Pittsburgh says, I have a StreamYard recorded interview. The audio sample rate is 44.1 kilohertz, bringing it into Resolve for edit. The sample rate of 48 kilohertz is the default. What's the best process for sample rate conversion to get my audio back in sync, and can I do it within Resolve?
Go, Jason.
I'm sure there's a way to do it in Resolve, but my kind of go-to is just roll it through Edit Ready and then decide what you're going to do with it. It's a lot easier.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Put all your tips in the Put all your tips in the clips in the timeline. Get that word straight. And then on delivery, there's a checkbox. You have to make sure you check, and it says when you export them, export individual clips. So basically, you're using it like you would use Compressor in Final Cut Pro. Put all your clips in, and as Alex would say, conform to an editing medium like ProRes. Don't stick with all those funky codecs.
Yes, please. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. Up next, global commercial real estate firm Cushman & Wakefield has made a $150 million investment in co-working space provider WeWork. What does this signal about the future of remote work, and how might this investment be spent? Hopefully, at least some of it on tech.
Go ahead, Courtney.
It signals bad timing on the investment because...
I think they've done it since COVID. I mean, I think that investment happened. I mean, I think that they're not bad timing. I think they see something. I mean, obviously the value of WeWork dropped a bit, so it's more of a bargain. I think that co-working is going to make a big return because people aren't going to want to invest in spaces. They're going to want to flexibly grow their workforce and give them somewhere to go when they want to. So I think that those things could work well. I do think, to your point, Rupert, that having studios in there would make a difference. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and says Sony Xperia Pro iPhone with 1-inch 20 megapixel sensor from RX100 line, mechanical iris, f2, a 4K 120 frames per second and photo and video app with rack focus support, removable MSD card, headphone, headset jack, and screen. Compare with Sony mirrorless as a monitor. Discuss this beast.
Go ahead, Josh. Have people been doing this?
Sorry?
Have people been doing this? And Bill, I'm pulling the first hours out, so don't put any more in. Anyway,
thank you.
They keep on going back and forth. Go ahead, Josh. Are people actually using this?
So this was just released. The 1-inch sensor that comes in Sony's RX100 line has now been released. They put it in the camera, and the camera bump is actually smaller than the iPhones, but it's part of the array of cameras that they have. I put all of the specs that I could fit in Mukana, but actually you have that 4K 120 frames per second. You can double it as a monitor for your Sony camera if you have. And it's a good way to get your headset jack and your micro SD card expansion back, which is much better than trying to pull data off of a lightning cable.
I really like it. It's $2,000, right? That's the
$1,800.
$1,800, yeah. So I thought that, and then I realized I spent $2,000 on my phone. So I mean, on my iPhone. So it's not.
Well, it's basically an RX100 plus a phone.
Right. Which is what I've talked about.
Which costs $700 on its own.
Right. Absolutely. All right. We're now going to change subjects to what is turning out to be a very popular subject, which is Zoom events and Zoom conferences. We have been talking about it in little bits and spurts, but Sam Kakaiko from Zoom has he offered to come on and answer some of our questions, and we're really excited to have him. Sam, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm always glad to be here with you guys.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have you here. Can you tell people, for those listening, what your official role is at Zoom and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I run the event specialist team. So we are part of the event services organization. Specifically within that organization, the event specialists, my direct reports, are the guys that are doing production. So we offer paid consulting and in-event support services for any events using Zoom products. So Zoom meetings, Zoom webinars, and now Zoom events. And then you're going to be working with one of my guys in the instance where you're doing something with split production, like you're doing here in the office hours. You're working with ADAMS, you're working with vMix, you're working with NDI, those sorts of production things. That's where my team's going to get involved and help answer the questions. Really, myself and my team's backgrounds are all from the live production world. I went through live theater and corporate and house of worship and was building escape rooms when they found me. So that's kind of where all of our backgrounds come from. And really, kind of as I built this team up, our goal was to sort of bridge the gap between the live production companies that are already out there, already doing events as the shutdowns happened. And cool, how do we take those events and use Zoom as part of them? How do we bridge those gaps? What weird idiosyncrasies are we going to find on the Zoom side? All the things that you guys have been experimenting with for the past, year and a half now, and all those little tips and tricks that you've found. Our goal is to be there and available for customers to help not have to find all those through a year of experimentation.
And Zoom events and Zoom conferences now are new. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the highlights of what they add to what we already had?
Right. So if you think of through like how, because me and my team are the ones who actually build Zoomtopia. So I've done Zoomtopia for 5 years now, and our other internal events. And if you think of how I had to do Zoomtopia in 2020. Where it was a series of Zoom webinars. And with Zoom webinars, there's no concurrency. So each of those webinars that needs to happen at the same time or be running even in a practice mode so my presenters can get in and get kind of cleared. If we say we're going to have, that year we had 10 tracks at the same time. So there were 10 webinars that needed to be running at once, but there's really 20 because there's 10 that are actually happening in this hour and there's 10 for the next hour. So that takes 20 different Zoom account users that have to have these webinar licenses, that have to have the different sessions scheduled under them. You have to be logging in with the right one or logging in with an account that has alt host privileges. And it starts getting really messy really quick. Zoom events, conferences specifically, just completely flips that on its head. And it now says, look, there's one event with one person that hosts it, concurrency be damned. Just set up all the sessions you want under there. Technically, if you ask us how many sessions you can do at a time, we're going to tell you 13 because that's what we did on Zoomtopia this year. Realistically, it's not a hard limit. While we had 13 scheduled sessions at a time for Zoomtopia, I saw up to 30 running at one time during those days.
30 running at the same time. Is that right?
Yep, that's what we saw on that. And again, that's why if you ask your account rep, they're going to tell you 13 simultaneous sessions, just because that's what it's been tested to. But there is not a hard limit set on it.
And conferences is now out?
Yes, conferences got released on Tuesday. What was it? The 26th of October is when it officially GA'd. The only thing that you may have seen already, if you saw it on Zoomtopia, was the Expo Hall is not part of conferences in its release right now. There will be a beta coming soon for the Expo Hall specifically. Everything else you saw in conferences is there, which I guess just as the kind of jumping straight to it, if you've already looked at summits and kind of found any of the limitations there, I think what you're going to find now that conferences has released is that every event is a conference. If it's multiple sessions, you're just doing it as a conference. The way licensing works, it's all the same. So if you have a Zoom events license, you can create any of the 3 event types, a single session, a summit, or a conference. So in my opinion, summits are a little bit simpler to build, but they have a lot of limitations. Now that conferences is released, everyone in this room, all of your events are going to be conferences.
It's very cool. We have so many questions stacking up that I think we're going to dive right into them because there's a lot of interest. So so let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Go ahead, Bill.
Sure. Guy Cochran in Seattle here in the panel starts out with, what video resolution is the default on Zoom events? 360p, 720p, 1080p?
So it doesn't change. Zoom Events is, at the end of the day, a wrapper for standard meetings and webinars. So there isn't a change in the default resolution that's going to happen within Zoom Events. You still need to get that approved. So I've said it on this show before. Reach out to support. If you have a business or hire account, you can just request 1080p, including for webinars. Make sure you ask for webinars because it's a separate flag on the back end. And then every time you schedule a webinar, there's a checkbox or a couple checkboxes that you set for your HD settings on that webinar. Otherwise, you can end up in a situation where you have 1080 for the panelists, but the attendees are still watching 360. So you want to make sure you're looking for those checkboxes. If you don't have a business account, when you submit a support ticket, you can get 720 turned on. And then if you have a specific key event that you're saying, hey, here's my event dates, it's this really important event, you can get them to do 1080 for those event dates, even with a pro account.
Next question.
Our own Sky Gleason is up next. And Sky says, how do I get the OnZoom platform to promote my Man in the Kitchen cook-along next Friday, November 12th, at 12 p.m. Pacific?
It's actually 5 p.m. and yes, shameless.
So what's so Sam, what is the process when people, is there a way to get more promotion, I guess, from, when people are building their own events?
So I guess this is our first chance to really differentiate OnZoom versus Zoom Events, because they are different things. OnZoom is not a license you buy. OnZoom is where it has an event directory where you can search, or we have those featured events. Zoom Events doesn't have that. Zoom Events just says, I'm a corporation and I'm going to make my events, and then I'm going to publish them myself and put them where I'm going to put them. OnZoom has that directory where people can come and say, I want to watch a cooking demonstration. What do I find? And they find that in the kitchen. Other than that, there's a lot of similarities. Zoom Events did spin off from OnZoom. Not that it wasn't already in the plans, but ultimately the code base came from it. But there are it is a different product. That being said, I don't know the official process for OnZoom to get featured, but I'm going to go toss that. I found the name of the person who's handling it internally right now. So I'm going to toss that over to them. I need to find
Sam, what are you doing next Friday? I got a cooking show I'd like to invite.
Yep.
Next question.
Okay, moving on. Grant Whitehead's up next from Adelaide in Australia.
I think we missed one. There's a lot of stuff. Just hold on for 1 second. Sorry, everybody. Sure. Just don't move anything. I think you missed one. That was.
Yeah, I was trying something dove out.
Yeah. So okay, go ahead and try that now.
Okay. This one says, if I want to run a 4-day conference with 4 concurrent Zoom meetings, not webinars, for 1,000 people total on the Zoom event platform, what would that cost? Can I use my existing Zoom meetings account?
So you would need to create, this is a Zoom event. So you need a Zoom Events license. You need a Zoom Events license of 1,000 capacity to let you sell 1,000 tickets. And then conferences works a little bit different than the other. So because you're talking about concurrent events, you have this, or concurrent sessions within that event, we're in conference. That's just full stop. Conference is what the type is. You need a Zoom Events 1,000 license to be able to sell that many tickets. And then that will let 1,000 people buy the ticket for your event and come and go to one of those sessions. Now, if the next thing you need to think about is that Zoom Events 1,000 capacity is ultimately driving your webinar capacity also. So if you had webinar type sessions, you would be set. You would be able to do it right there. Since you're talking about meeting type sessions, you need to think about how many tickets you want to sell, which is the Zoom Events capacity you'll need. And then you want to think about how many people you'll want in any of those meeting sessions, because ultimately you're going to need a large meeting add-on on your license to be able to get to whatever that capacity is. So like a pro license can do 100 capacity in those meetings. So you could sell 1,000 tickets. And then if you have these 4 meetings, each of them could have 100 people in them. And anybody else would be able to watch from the lobby live streams. Or you could step it up all the way to a large meeting 500 or a large meeting 1,000, in which case any of those meetings could have 1,000 people in them. out of those 1,000 ticketed people, shift however you want.
Next question.
Grant Whitehead is back again from Adelaide, and he says, what special access does a speaker ticket give? Can the speaker start a meeting or a webinar or join them before other attendees?
And, yeah, go ahead, Greg. You want to ask something? You answer.
Well, I'm actually working with Sam and his team on a conference. It's gonna be next weekend, in fact. So we've been working with them on this. But just in relation to Grant's question, there's several different ticket types that a speaker can have. So there's a speaker ticket and a panelist ticket. And so if Sam could explain sort of what you also get with a panelist ticket, that'd be helpful for me.
Yeah. So that's where ultimately there's two different things behind the ticket. There's what is this person going to be when they join the session, and what is this person to the event at large. And that's kind of the difference between a panelist and a speaker. Within a webinar type session, you just have attendees and panelists, and then you have your co-host. A panelist ticket gives them panelist access. So they come in on the panelist side of the webinar, like the group of us are right here. It gives them the ability to come in during the practice session for the webinar. Panelists can join during practice session. A speaker is just a panelist that is also listed on your event website. So when you go look at a Zoom event, you take a look at it and you can see all the different sessions that are happening throughout this conference. You can see the different speakers attached to each session. They've got a little picture, they've got a profile, they've got their name, they say what company and their title and stuff like that. That's a speaker. Ultimately, when they join the session, they're a panelist, but a speaker is a publicly listed panelist. Now, there's one oddity to that. When you're creating a session, it's going to force you to have a primary speaker. The primary speaker is a speaker who also has alt host abilities. And this is so if I have 4 meetings happening at one time, I have my 4 different speakers for them, and my primary speakers will be able to actually start that practice session. And they'll come in with the host role if they're the ones who are starting it, just like a regular alt host would. That way, I, as the host, don't have to try to go and start up each of my 13 concurrent sessions all happening at once. So primary speaker is a publicly listed speaker that also has alt host capabilities. No other speakers have alt host. So your other speakers, they're publicly listed. They'll come in as panelists. They can join during the practice session, but they have to wait for someone who has alt host to actually start up that practice session, same as regular webinars.
Go ahead, Josh.
And Sam, would it be fair to characterize the speaker is the alt host within that session only?
The primary speaker, yes. And that's what it is listed as, primary speaker. And then you have additional speakers. So you have one primary, you always have one primary no matter what. And then you have just as many speakers as you want. And yes, they have alt host for that one only. One thing that changed at launch is you can now hold multiple ticket types. So if you guys had heard me talk when we talked about Zoomtopia, there was a limitation there that's no longer there. You can now hold multiple ticket types. It actually looks a little bit ugly in the UI today. You'll actually see the different tickets for each ticket type you have on an event. It should be Sunday. We expect that is actually getting rolled up, and it's now just going to tell you have multiple ticket types, and then it'll list all the sessions and show you what access you have for which sessions, because all of these tickets are being done at a session level. So I can have primary speaker for this session, I could have alt host for that session, I could have panelists for a third session. And then if I have any special ticket type for the event, it means that I'm also going to have attendee access to any session that I'm not specifically called out for.
Next question.
Sky Gleason here on the panel again. This time asks, what are the payment methods for OnZoom that it accepts?
So OnZoom, I believe, is just PayPal versus Zoom Events, which is PayPal and Stripe.
So you can only pay with PayPal?
I think so for OnZoom.
Oof.
Actually, no. Sorry, it looks like PayPal or credit card.
As the transactional background, as the transactional backend is what I'm asking.
Yeah. Sorry, I have a huge aversion to PayPal. Anyway, so next question.
Moving on, Sky Gleason, Seattle. Again, I use alt host to bring in crew and guests. Is there a better way to do this?
In the OnZoom.
In OnZoom, I don't know for sure if it has this other change, but I imagine it does, because with you for OnZoom, are you alt hosting, you're alt hosting someone who's not on your account, correct? You're muted.
Correct. I'm bringing in crew and or guests or friends and family, other than the people that are paying.
So I'm going to have to answer this for Zoom events and then let you figure out how much of this exists over in OnZoom. In Zoom events, I mean, the downside to that is you now have like friends and family and guests and people who necessarily you don't want to give that control to. You have them coming in with co-host privilege, and you have them like, oh, they started early, they joined during your practice session, and they hit start webinar, and you're like, crap, stop, go back.
Yep.
So that I would not love that. On the Zoom events side, like its most basic level would be with Zoom events with specifically towards the bigger for conferences, you can create multiple ticket types. So you could create a ticket type that is a VIP guest or a friends and family, and then you could put a guest list onto that. So you're actually importing, here's the list of emails that I want to be able to purchase this VIP ticket type, which is free. And I'm guessing this is all coming up because you're doing paid tickets. So
Right.
like you have to find a way to get them to them because otherwise they're paying. So that's how you would do it on the Zoom event side is you would create another ticket type. You would call it VIP. You would specify it to a guest list and say only these people are able to buy it. And there's a lot of cool things you can do with ticket types there. Like you can, with conferences, you can take different ticket types and restrict them down to specific tracks. So you can take your sessions and you can say like, hey, I'm going to sell a ticket type that's keynotes only, and maybe that's free versus this other one, which maybe you have to pay if you want the afternoon breakouts. Or I could do an early bird ticket type that ends ticket sales a month before my show and drops $50 off the price, or any of the things that you've kind of thought of with different ticket structures. Zoom events can do a lot of those.
Can I mute my ticket types? For instance, if I have an alt, again, I need crew and or guest speakers to come in, but I can't pay for them to come in. So I have to give away these alt host. Currently, I'm using alt host as my bring all the people in that I need to be on the show.
Yeah. So, and you mean mute them as in just make them not be visible?
Well, the ticket. I'm sorry, this is going longer than I meant it. I guess I need to get the crew. I need to get the cast. I get and the talent in the room, and the only way to do that currently is alt hosting that. Of the 99 tickets in the OnZoom experience, I have to only sell 80 tickets, and then I've got 19 other people that I can bring in without having to have them pay for it.
Right. Yeah. So ultimately, it's going to come out of your ticket capacity on Zoom events as well, because ultimately, Zoom events ticket capacity is also going to count all of your speakers, your sponsors, all the special tickets.
Rupert?
Just to related to Sky's question, my experience seems to have been on Zoom is that when you give the alt host to somebody, if they are not on your account, that they get a slightly restrictive set of features from the set that we'd normally expect if that person was on the same account. So that may just be worth watching out for.
Next question.
Moving on, Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next. What's the difference between the Zoom events and the Zoom events services?
So this is something I deal with all day, every day. Zoom events is a product, and event services is a professional services team here at Zoom. So Zoom event services helps with paid services for consulting and event support for any Zoom product, meetings, webinars, and Zoom events, which is a product.
Sorry, next question.
Fair enough. Grant Whitehead, Adelaide, Australia is back. What does the Zoom event lobby support? Does the Zoom event lobby support multiple text languages?
So right now, everything across the Zoom events platform is English only. There is a globalization effort in place. I don't have a timeline to share on that, but it is English only right now.
Next question.
Grant is back again, and this time he asked, does each of the concurrent sessions need to accommodate the total number of attendees for the event?
So the way it'll work changes between meetings and webinars, and that changes for two reasons. So your Zoom events capacity is your webinar capacity. If I have 10 webinars happening at the same time and I have a 3,000 capacity Zoom events license, then I can sell 3,000 tickets to my event. And from within that, they can go wherever they want. They could all go to the first session. They could split evenly between the 10 sessions. They can split in any combination. With meetings, you have the additional limitation down to my overall event is still capacity of my Zoom events license, but for the meeting itself, its capacity for any of those individual single meetings within that event is going to be limited by my Zoom meeting capacity, which could be, I could use a large meeting add-on to get up to a 1,000 capacity, but there's nothing above that. So I could have a Zoom events 50,000 license and put a meeting session in it, and I could sell 50,000 tickets, but only 1,000 people are ever getting into that single meeting session. That's where the live stream to the lobby does come in handy, because I have those 50,000 people, only 1,000 can get into the session itself, but any others could actually watch from the lobby of the conference itself. And they have a one-way video feed coming there with video, audio, and captions.
Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas here on the panel. Up next with, do Zoom events follow the normal Zoom network topologies and infrastructure, including any on-premise Zoom zone controllers?
Just give me 1 second, because I saw this come in really early, and I asked to try to get, and I didn't get an answer. So the answer is I don't have an answer. My expectation is the actual meetings and webinars, again, it's just kind of a wrapper and authentication to it. But I don't expect on-premise zone controllers would be used during Zoom event sessions.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania here in the panel says, does the backstage webinar feature, has it been released for Zoom conferences yet?
So the quick answer is no, it hasn't. The bigger answer is kind of breaking that question up a little bit into the backstage feature is going to be a webinar feature. So it'll be available in webinars that are not part of Zoom events, which is really important to me, because Zoom events is not the right choice for every situation. Sometimes just a webinar, just a meeting, or a series of webinars and your own way of skinning it is the way to run your event. So Backstage is available for, or when it's released, will be available for all Zoom webinars, but it is going to be gated behind the Zoom Events license. So basically the Zoom Events license is how we're monetizing the Backstage feature. But once you have that Zoom Events license, you kind of get that power feature to it. Now you can use it on a regular webinar. You don't have to use it just within a conference.
Go ahead, Josh.
Will the features be kind of piecemealed out? I know there's some pretty really interesting stuff with the audio controls in the Backstage. Is that something that might be released first and then later getting different parts?
Backstage will release fairly complete. I think we're real close to testing it, but it should all come as one big, here you go, and it works all together, which, because inherently it's taking a little bit because they had to redo some of the architecture to figure out how these two meetings coincide with each other, the backstage portion and the onstage portion, how chat works between the two of them. They had to add a lot of new stuff to kind of make this a useful, usable experience. And me and my team have had a lot of input on making sure that that is a useful, usable experience for production.
Next question.
JJ McKenna, a friend of ours, says, does Sam have any learning reflections from how Office Hours 2.0 seems to work that could benefit either Office Hours 2 or Zoom events?
I definitely have some thoughts, and I've worked with Alex and Andy on some of those thoughts. I actually, was it last week or no, it was 2 weeks ago. I don't remember how long it's been, but I was actually out checking out the setup with them. So during, I think, like testing days 2 and 3, I was sitting in the corner of the room there. But yeah, so we got to talk a lot about it. And there's definitely a lot of reflections going both ways to how me and my team switch stuff, as well as some input on the Office Hours show. But it's definitely really interesting. I think a lot of Office Hours 2.0 is built on the Office Hours format, right? Because it is such an interesting show format with its mass of panelists and how it goes through them in questions, versus a lot of the shows that I'm switching, which are much more a few to many type one way. It's a webinar, right?
Which we would call legacy
right.
events.
Right. So there's definitely the difference in structure there. Like I was talking to Andy yesterday actually about the super sources and the logic they built for that matrix of how it migrates between them, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, it seems like a simple thing, and it is some crazy math to figure that, like thought process to figure out when you watch those little super sources working. It's a thing. Next question.
Alex Goldner here in the panel from London is up next. He says, established event companies have decades of experience in live events. How can you convince them that hybrid experiences don't work?
Go ahead, Sam.
Well, I don't know that this question's necessarily for me. This feels like more a question for the panel.
I mean, we just, I'm about to talk about it. I'm talking at Streaming Media West right after this this morning. And, the thing that usually I talk a lot about is the fact that, have you ever gone to one that you actually enjoyed? Like, have you ever actually been at a hybrid as an online participant where you went, oh, that was a great experience. Great experience. Like, oh no, they did it. But the thing is that for people doing hybrid events, it's such a risky, the hybrid events are the most risky event that you can possibly do, because if you turn off that audience, we have to remember when we talk about doing events, we're trying to address we're looking at our addressable market. A physical event is very exclusive because it shuts out 99% of your regional market, let alone the global market. So the physical event, and you may want it to be exclusive. Maybe I've done events where 50 people control $3 trillion worth of investment. That's the 50 you want. like just buy them nice dinners and do all the things you need to do. But for the most part, you want to get to as much of your addressable market as possible. That's why digital events make sense, and that's why people are arguing for hybrid events. The problem is that if you bring somebody in and it's boring, which is what most hybrid events is really, really boring, because you're now on the kiddie table, you're sitting in the back. You've now burned up your relationship with that group. It is way harder for you to get them to come back after they have a poor experience. Like Sony just a digital event. I went to it. It was so bad. The chances of me going back to another Sony event, I mean, they'd have to do incredible amounts of advertising to persuade me to come back again. And so it's super dangerous to do something unless you really have thought out the hybrid experience. And even then, the best you can do is about, it's good. Like that's as good as it's going to get. It wasn't bad, and whereas if you go to digital events, you can create stuff that is truly profound, because you can be moving, you can attach people from globally, you can have them interacting with each other, you can change who's hanging out with each other at any instant, and that their physical position doesn't mean anything. There's all kinds of things you can do in digital that you cannot do in physical, that you cannot do in hybrid. And which is why it's going to be the big game. Like it's going, like the big game is digital. There's still going to be physical events, but hybrid is this weird, it's a weird thing that we're doing, and we do this all the time. We do this halfway thing because the old hasn't figured out how to do the new yet, and we see this in everything that's ever happened. Ever, is that, hey, how about we mix the two things together because that's the only thing we understand, but eventually we give up and move on. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, kind of the same thing you were tailing off with there, Alex. Basically, when you're trying to explain to someone there's a better experience available and they're not aware of it, the best thing to do is to A/B it. Here's the difference. Yep. And that's maybe it's an okay experience. Maybe there's certain areas where this fits in, but this is what you could have. This, and the same way when people don't know they have bad audio, bad video, how do you convince them? You show them the difference. And that's why we're doing what we're doing here. And this is why we're making all this technology available and letting you know how we're doing it and talking about camera quality and talking and open, not open sourcing, but open framework so that everyone can see it, because we want everyone's digital shows to get better, because to Josh's point, that's how we move this forward. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, so I totally agree. And I think a lot of what we see people when they say hybrid, what they mean at first is there's a camera in the back of the room watching the in-person experience. And that creates exactly what you said bad. Of like, that's not an equitable experience. And so I find myself doing a lot of work towards trying to promote equitable experience, but equitable doesn't mean the same. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make is you hamstring your digital experience, trying to make it something that your in-person audience and digital have the same, instead of, look, those in-person people, they're going to dinner. Your digital audience isn't going to dinner tonight with each other. So give your digital audience something that your in-person doesn't get. Like, don't be afraid to to like, don't
Right.
lose all those networking opportunities and all the new things digital can bring you. Like, don't cut off all the things that you have access to just because you can't give it to both.
And one of the things that we do that we've been pushing more and more clients towards, and we've only gotten to do it a couple of times, is put an LED wall in front of the physical audience. Let them eat dinner, let them have lunch, let them hang out with each other. But the experience for everybody is the same. So the speakers are somewhere else, because the problem really is that as soon as you put one person in the audience, you're fighting a million years of evolution. You know, like that they're going to look at that person and they're going to shut out everybody else, because, and so you have to give them a screen, that you give the speakers a screen that they can look at, and don't let them look at anybody else in the room. So that they can focus on that online audience, and then put them on a big screen, big LED wall in front of the group that's there. They can even go to dinner with them later, but just don't have them interacting with that physical environment and reminding the online audience that they're not there. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, Alex, it is an uphill battle though, and I think for a lot of people, they're just going to have to go through the process and find find that it doesn't work. And I have these conversations. I find myself having these conversations more frequently now. And part of the problem is there's so many people in the event space that have been hurt financially. Event planners, event planning companies. They weren't able to adapt, and they literally are just counting the days until they can start doing in-person events again. And trying to talk them out of a hybrid event is like talking to the wall sometimes.
The funny thing is that the digital events that I just explained are actually more complicated and more resource intensive than the old events that they did before. They're actually easier to do and will look better and sound better and be a better experience. But they're so attached to the old. And I think the other thing we have to remember is that none of these events were very good. We mostly showed up for the coffee and cookies. I mean, the actual presentations for 90% of the events that we went to are really boring. Go ahead, Rupert.
I just say it again. I often interpret hybrid as transitionary. It's just a way to get from where we are now to where we're going, and it's just a matter of how quickly can we do it. And hand-holding people through that, it's a bit like guiding them through grief. They've got to go through some stages, right? And it's a process, and we'll just get there in the end.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
So, Alex, going back to what you were just talking about, do you think the model for traditional event planning companies really works in sort of this new space? And so do they have the technological capabilities? Do they have the technological expertise? I mean, I know they can hire consultants like you or me or Grant or
they have to hire
folks.
consultants that understand it. Like they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to, that's why they're not doing it. If they knew how to do it, they would do it every day, because, I'm pitching something for next year that is one event, one venue, going out to, having an online experience, so people are watching it at home, but it's also going out to 300 other venues at the same time, and any one of those venues can stand up and ask a question. So the thing is that there's a venue experience in 300 cities. And there's one place that the speakers are, and some of those speakers are coming in remotely. So you have people coming in over Zoom. You have people that are in one space. You have 300 locations of about 300 to 500 people. And then you have people watching at home. That's that's a whole different future, and it still requires all of the skills that these event companies know, except for that connection between the venues and the connection between the people, and so they do need us as consultants, but there's a huge amount of that is just very traditional event production, and that's the part that they're stepping over.
But I think that's part of the challenge is like it's such a niche space, and
it is right now,
and they have really they really have to think out of the box in order to be able to visualize like what the capabilities actually are.
And it's our job to show them. Like that's the thing is that, I'm trying to get a space just rented, around our office so that I can just do events all the time and just show people what the future looks like. Because that's what we need to do is we need to show people the future rather than continuing to give them the past that they asked for. What they're asking for is the past. And we need to be able to find some way to show them the future. Next question.
Moving on, Hasba Kejar, a friend in Cape Town, South Africa, says, a big software company CEO said in 1989, devices and software must be the same globally. It's 2021. Why is events and OnZoom not in South Africa? A Honda bought in Japan or South Africa must have the same support and service.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, so with Zoom events, there's definitely some different pieces going, particularly around paid events. We're dealing with big governments. As such, we have to go through negotiations with them and how we're going to handle taxes and how money works. It's the name of the game. So we're working through it. And that geographic list you'll see expanding as we keep going. The mission statement for Zoom is making video communications frictionless and secure. That includes everywhere. That's our mission statement. That's what we're going for. But we do have to go through some legal loopholes to do that.
Go ahead, Rupert.
As far as OnZoom is concerned, I mean, that is and still is in beta. I don't know whether, that will expand later, or I'm wondering whether that might get rolled into Zoom events at some level. But I mean, also I sympathize with, these global infrastructures that, as well as everything Sam obviously said, which one can kind of visualize also, you then have the bandwidth and quality of service type issues to consider, whether you're going to establish infrastructure in those countries or have guaranteeable peering arrangements with carriers and all that stuff to be able to guarantee it as a usable service.
Next question.
George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia writes, will there be temporary upgrade options that are shorter than the current monthly minimum subscription periods?
Go ahead, Sam.
So they're looking at licensing model, but there's no information to share as far as like trying to get a 3-day license or something like that. Yeah.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, when do you see Zoom providing isolated audio video feeds per panelist natively?
Sam? This is the question we all want. This is a question. Don't think of it as just coming from Douglas. Think of it as coming from all of us.
No, I mean, I want it too. I'm the one fighting for it internally. So, I mean, you see that to some extent with our Zoom Rooms NDI integration. There's also the changes in SDKs to allow raw data access, which is something that third parties like Liminal can start working towards. But I think Zoom is listening. We're taking we're taking a listen to you guys. You are an important group for us. It's why me and my team exist. And me and my team are saying the same thing you're saying directly to the product team and trying to figure it out on the roadmap and priorities.
It's literally gotten to the point where any update to anything in Zoom, all I think about is, and I didn't get ISO out of this. like it doesn't. There's no other. Like my tunnel vision has gotten to the point where all I hear is no ISO. So because it would revolutionize every high end event ever. Next question.
George Butters again back with, when is OnZoom coming to Canada?
I don't have an answer for OnZoom. Zoom events. Let's see. I feel like Canada's on the list for, yes, Canada is fully on the list for Zoom events, including paid events. That's always the one that's missing. If there's one missing, is the ability to host paid events. Canada's on that list. Again, OnZoom and Zoom events are different things. But as someone else just called out, like OnZoom, I think it was Rupert, OnZoom is still in beta or is in beta. It's not near the focus that Zoom events is. Zoom events is the flagship product.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, here in the panel. Zoom meetings and webinars inside Zoom events have some distinguishing characteristics to their non-Z event counterparts. For example, alt hosts do not need to be within the Zoom account. What are other unique Z events, meetings, webinars, features?
I don't have a terribly comprehensive list, but it is interesting because as a rule, we say that meetings and webinars are just wrappered in Zoom events, but in practice, there are some oddities like that. Particularly, you find the oddities or the differences wherever you're doing stuff while scheduling. So setting up polls, setting up streams, setting up pre-assigned breakout rooms. Those are all things that you do while scheduling a meeting and or webinar, which means you're doing that on the Zoom Events platform. Because whenever you're in a Zoom event, all those sessions are created from Zoom Events. You don't edit them at all from the standard Zoom portal. And so that's where up until conferences, there was a lot of limitations on things. Conferences opens most of those up. So polls you can set up in conferences. In conferences, you can stream to a third party now. So you can stream to YouTube or Facebook from sessions in conference, but you need to have live streaming to the lobby, or you can't live stream to the lobby at the same time because you can only stream to one place. So it's still a bit limited Ed Hillock had some really good thoughts on that in another group about the idea that when you're doing a Zoom event, the whole point is to ticket people into your event, get them in your events, and do it here, and then you can share the recordings out later. But polls are there. Pre-signing breakouts is not available in Zoom events right now. Language interpretation is there in conferences. So while I don't have a full list, that's kind of the category of things you want to think about as being slightly different, is all those things that you would do during settings. Once you get into the session, the only reason you'll find any differences is around things that have some form of user permission attached to them. So like, do I have the ability to record? Do I have the ability to stream? Those things at the event level need to have been configured correctly before publishing, because what we can't let you do is we can't let you sell tickets and then change the agreement on the ticket holders. We can't let you not say you're going to record and then they get in the event and you record them. So those things all need to be set at publish, and then you'll have all those settings within the sessions themselves.
Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, up next here in the panel. Can Zoom rooms be used in Zoom events, and if so, how?
Not today. So right now, to join a Zoom event in any form or factor, you need to have, you need to be on the Zoom desktop client, latest version of it. You need to be logged in with a Zoom account that has the ticket. So that excludes things like phone dial-in, CRC, Zoom rooms. The mobile apps have a method to join, but it's not real pretty, which is all of these things together come back to why I say that webinars and meetings standalone still have a very real place in the event space. Like having to have a Zoom account, having to use that for authentication, it's very real. So Zoom events is not the end all be all today. Those things are going to be expanding out. Zoom rooms obviously is a major target for us. The other piece to keep in mind, especially if you're thinking about like Zoom rooms for NDI, is if you're doing split production, then your meeting where your speakers and your talent are joining, that your Zoom room is joining to pull those NDI feeds out to your video switcher, guess what? It's not in Zoom events. That's just a meeting. So you can still do that, no problem. But your sort of what I would consider your webinar computer, the computer that's taking your mixed feed out and injecting that to your audience, that's Zoom events. Yeah, and if it is, yeah.
And that's how we've done webinars forever. You know, for the last year, which is basically everybody's in a meeting with Zoom rooms, and we're using, we're grabbing ISOs from each. We have a computer for every person, and then we're pulling all that together and then putting it into a webinar. And events would be, I assume, the same.
Yeah, it's the same. It's just it's only that webinar computer that gets affected, because those 16 meetings you have in that studio, those aren't happening on Zoom events.
Right. Exactly. Go ahead, Greg.
Sam, I got, while we're talking about Zoom rooms, I got to ask, are we ever going to see that web controller for Room NDI?
I imagine I'll bring that back up to them because it is important that web ZRC keeps up to date. You don't have to have 16 iPads on the table.
We still have that. The next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle here in the panel. What could you imagine that we as office hours do with Zoom events? Would do with a Zoom events 1000 license. He has two. A virtual mini ongoing NAB type trade show used as a training ground. What are the ideas?
Are we asking? Is that a general question?
Yeah, I mean, it's fair game. I just signed up for another contract, and while I was negotiating, I was like, and I need a couple of those, and what am I going to do with them? Because we were testing, Joff Kaufman and I were testing, Rotem and I were testing. So I'm like, I'm not sure what we're going to do with it. Are we going to invite vendors to come in and do dog and pony type shows? Or I'm not even sure what I'm going to do with it. I just was looking for some ideas. I want to train people because I want, if something happens, I want talent to be able to come in and run a show. But for office hours, I'm like, we could do something with this. I just don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting puzzle. I think that the more I think about conferences and the more I think about those things, I think that, as we get ready for 2.0, I'm ramping up so many guests for the second hour. I'm like, I don't know if I need a conference. I can have, we just have, there's something new every morning that we work on, and rather than some specific thing. So anyway, yeah, it's an interesting. We'll have to keep brainstorming. Go ahead, Josh.
I think with the publishing of what you have afterwards, that lobby that lives on after that you want to kind of syndicate and have on the Zoom platform, those type of events would be suited for it.
Yeah. Next question.
Next question from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris says, is there any of the Zoom offerings that allow the host to turn off virtual backgrounds for all participants?
Oh my gosh. Please. That's my second highest value target. Number one is isolated audio. Number two is force virtual backgrounds off.
So
I'm sure they're both related to issues that
there's a really cool
aren't
feature.
Technical.
There's a really cool feature coming out that plays towards this, but isn't going to do what you want. Other than that, I'm pretty sure there's an account level setting that can force off virtual backgrounds.
It forces it off for your own users.
For your own users, but not the ones joining.
I want to say basically you can't turn if you enter this event, you cannot turn a virtual background on. Like that's can't turn it on. So can't. Because I literally as a user, I can't watch it. Like I literally, if someone says, hey, I got an event and they put on a virtual background, I'm like, I'm gone. Like I can't, it creates so much internal upset for my little compositor brain that I can't, like it's literally violence to me to turn on a virtual background. Yours works better. Yours isn't as bad as it. I know I just attacked virtual backgrounds and you're sitting in front of one. Yours isn't bad because you actually match the background with your focal length works. You have a little edge issue, but it is, but you match the focal length. The lighting mostly works. You only have a couple places around your head that are problematic. But it is not what most people look like when they do virtual backgrounds. So like yours, if everyone looked like yours, I'd probably be less opinionated about about the thing. But most people look like they're falling apart in front of me.
I had my internal struggles this week because I was like, all right, I know I'm going on this Friday, but I was out of town all week. I was like, do I clean up the office and figure out how to go back to a real background? And for those who haven't heard my story before, the reason I can get by with Alex without him just hating me is because this background was taken with this camera in this physical place. It is the back wall behind me. I just don't have it looking as nice.
Right. Yeah, no, it's the only reason that one works. Go ahead, Alex.
Perhaps make it so they can't turn their camera on if they have a virtual background on. So what you do is you give people a chance to think about the privacy and say they can't take part, which is a slightly different thing than forcing them to reveal stuff they might not want to reveal on their camera.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ruben.
The other thing I wonder if Blur does the same thing to you. I think it would. I think it would because the Blur just messes up the lines. But yeah,
I've resorted because I have no tool in the back end to do it. I've just resorted to ridicule. That's all I can do. In every format that on every show that I'm on, the ridicule is all I can do because it's the only lever I have. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, I agree with Alex Gorner. If the virtual backgrounds weren't allowed, that would inevitably mean that the user would need to agree to that. If they were expecting their virtual background to work, that would just be another hump that they'd need to jump through when joining.
Let's go to the next question. We're running out of time.
Greg Gibson, Washington, D.C. up next with what are the best ways to maximize networking opportunities for attendees in Zoom conferences?
So right now you have chat in the lobby. You can create chat channels for each and every session, which I don't think I've actually seen anyone do yet, but you can actually create a different chat channel for each session. And like you pointed out, that lobby can live on. So that can become a discussion space where, hey, we talked about this one topic in the session. That was great. Let's get all the people who are interested in that and keep that dialogue going. And you're doing this without having to add people to Zoom chat and mess up your contacts. You also have the chat on sponsors. And then of course you have the Expo hall, which like I said, is not released right now. It's going to be opening up a beta soon. But the Expo is our main place for that's where networking is going to live. And I think you saw the very first iteration of it at Zoomtopia. I think the future is really bright for that space for us. It's a huge target.
Go ahead, Guy, real quick.
Yeah, Hopin had something where you could speed round. Have you thought about doing virtual cocktail hour, or 15-minute little chunks? That's something that Jeff Woodgren suggested after he did a Zoom event this last week, is to have a little 15-minute cocktail hour so people can go into another webinar or meeting and chat among themselves. Have to be moderated.
Yeah, and a lot of that, the moderation is the key point there. But a lot of that is more a use case than a feature necessarily, though we can also promote some stuff. Like we can promote some stuff as Zoom, because I love ideas like that. And that would be, you could spin up a meeting that you schedule as a cocktail hour or as coffee chat during your breaks, spin up a meeting and then throw random breakout rooms within it. With meetings, you could do breakout rooms. So you could break down into little groups of 4 or 5, let people actually have a meaningful conversation.
And I'm going to lock all these just so that we just let Sam answer them because we're running out of time. Next question.
Sky Gleason, Seattle. What is the partnership fee Zoom charges for a ticket in OnZoom?
I don't remember that we were charging for OnZoom yet. Or I say yet, that shouldn't be as ominous as it was. I didn't know we were charging. And we don't charge for Zoom events. So I will answer that for Zoom events. We don't take a cut. PayPal and Stripe do, but we don't.
Next question.
Rupert McRae, are there API endpoints for Zoom events?
There are none today.
Next question.
Jeffrey Powers, Madison, our friend, do events have the ability to run giveaways and swag to the audience?
There's not a feature within Zoom events, but you get access to the registrant details. So there's ways you could do it. Nothing inherent to the product.
Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle. That's a very nice virtual background you're using, and it makes your head explode when you move. Could you turn it off?
No, that was a little late. Next question.
Rupert McRae, what is the best way to run a green screen in Zoom event? As a separate meeting, a webinar practice session, or the new webinar backstage feature when it comes out?
So if you're talking about a green room as I would say you want to run it external to the platform. That's what I would do personally. I would just be running that as a separate meeting or webinar somewhere else. You could do something where you actually, in conferences, you could build a session and put it in a specific track that you only gave certain people access to, but it's getting really complicated and it's going to be visible for everyone, even if they can't join it. And nobody wants that. So I would say anything that's like my back comms channel, my green rooms, my talent meetings that I'm going to take for production, all those things I would just be running as meetings because I don't have an audience side of it. So no need to use webinars. I would do them all as meetings separately from the actual event.
We've really refined meetings with breakout rooms down to a science, and it is it's just a great experience, and it just isn't worth putting people actually in the webinar, other than this one that we're doing here. But I mean, for when we do big events inside of O9O, it's just so seamless that I have never thought of going back at this point. Next question.
Okay. Sky Gleason, Seattle. OnZoom has been in beta for over a year. Who's OnZoom's best use case at this point?
So OnZoom is for the consumer. OnZoom is for consumer-led events to be found and accessed by consumers. And Zoom Events is the targeted product for businesses, corporations, professional events.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman, what configuration options in Zoom events close after the first ticket is sold, as opposed to locked items after publishing?
I would say.
So I don't have a good list of this because to me, I consider them all locked at publishing. I'm not going to think of something as available for me to change. After I click publish, I'm not going to consider it available to me to change until someone clicks a ticket because I don't control that. So for me, I just focus on the things that lock at publishing. And for that, it changes which event type you're talking about. Conferences don't lock most things. The things that are going to lock are things that really change around the attendee registration process and permissions. Recording, streaming, registration questions. Those things can't change after the fact. And so because of that, I tell all of my people, as you're making things, you turn recording on, you turn live stream to the lobby on, you make sure your registration's right. If you don't want to use the recording later, great, you can hit stop. If you don't want to stream to the lobby, you can choose to just show the masthead instead of showing the live sessions. But turn them on, because if you mess that up now, you can't fix it.
Right. Go ahead, Josh, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and just changing the speakers or speaker order or adding speakers, is that something that you can do?
Within conferences, yes. So within conferences, I can delete sessions, I can add sessions, I can change the time. I can change the time of my whole event to add extra time to it. I can swap speakers in and out. I have a lot of flexibility in conferences.
But not summits or events.
events are the most restricted. Summits are pretty restricted, and this is that really good example of why I said you're never going to use a summit again. You're just going to do it in conferences to get access to stuff like that, where even if you built a conference that had no overlapping sessions, you still build it as a conference, and now you get access to change these things. You get access to interpreters and polls and the sponsors and all the other things that, whether you need them or not, they're there.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae here in the panel. Can Zoom Event Services or Zoom Professional Services offer studio space for virtual events when hosted on Zoom events?
No. So Event Services is our professional services org. They are the same. But no, we don't have a virtual space to rent out.
Wouldn't it be great if there was a whole network of those virtual spaces all over the U.S. and the world? It'd be amazing. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, could you ever see NDI coming to the main client?
I could see that. I don't think it's roadmapped currently, but I could see that.
Next question.
Greg Gibson, can you talk about Expo and what features we can expect in that?
So the Expo is right now, it lets sponsors have booths. And those booths have their resource table, which has their images and their PDFs you've uploaded for that sponsor. And then it has up to 4 meetings that you can run that live stream out to the booth there. Those meetings can have breakouts in them. The way we use it is an ask an expert type booth situation. Come in, then go down into a breakout with one of them. And then the other thing it has is your little avatars that are walking around and able to find other users of the conference that are nearby you that are open to networking and start chats with them and network that way.
Sorry, I just think about networking, people wandering around like it's just the thing that I don't do at conferences, and it just makes my skin crawl. Anyway, so next question.
Douglas Carmichael, are there any plans to link Zoom events with third-party question processing systems a la Mukana?
I can just say for Mukana, we're working on getting it into a Zoom app, and we hope to have it running there by January. So go ahead, Sam. I don't know if there's any other ones.
I think the only thing I'll add is that Zoom Apps is the route for that. Zoom Apps is how we're looking for our future integration for bringing in third-party extensions.
Yeah, and we hope to. We're working pretty hard at getting that working. So we should see something relatively soon. Next question.
Wilson Martinez in Charlotte, North Carolina. Any plans on letting host and co-host answer a Zoom poll?
Probably not. I don't think that's planned.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, how do larger corporations keep their meeting content secure when they're concerned about data getting out? Dedicated meeting connector VMs on premises?
I mean, it all starts with access control of your sessions. Who are you letting in? Because once you let someone in, like they can get to the data. They can hold up a cell phone to the screen. There's lots of security that Zoom has on authenticating people into your meetings themselves, and Zoom events being the most restrictive of them. There's also lots of security around adding watermarks to your audio and your video and stuff like that. The security of the data in transit, you can choose the regions it goes to with Zoom. That's not where the leak is happening. The leak is happening with the users at the end.
And I haven't actually used it. Does it do a persistent? Does it do one of those bouncing watermarks when you turn watermark on?
When you turn watermark on, there's one that goes on screen share content that just takes the user email and just plasters it all over it.
Yeah.
The interesting one to me is the audio watermark, which is an encoded tone that gets mixed in that is, it's up in that 20K range where we're not hearing it, but it's in the audio.
Ooh.
That one's fun. But all of those require you to have the users be authenticated by Zoom. It requires Zoom login because that's what it's using to build into that watermark. Yeah. It's kind of like how the start of security for an office started with don't let people follow you in the doorway. With Zoom, it starts with make sure you know who's in your meeting. Because at the end of the day, like someone said it earlier with you said it earlier with Lucasfilm, it was trust your people. If you trust your people, that's the problem. Every time they're the problem. It's not someone hacking into their system.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Jesse Mills, San Francisco, a friend of ours. Is mobile app compatibility being developed for Zoom events?
So mobile app right now, they can join, but they can't get to the lobby. And so for conferences and summits, they have to, there's a specific like skip to join browser page that shows, hey, here's all the sessions that are scheduled to be running right now. And then you can directly join them. It's actually the same for browser or sorry, not for browser, but for desktop. If you're not on a late enough client, there is a range there where you can join, but you can only join the sessions, not the lobby, depending on your version. And it also has that skip to join page. It's not a great experience. Of course, that's going to get improved, but it does exist. So there is a way to get your mobile users in.
Next question.
Josh Coppin here. The panel's back with, is the primary speaker the first speaker assigned to a session? If so, how would you change it? And is there some notification?
It is its own text box. As you're adding that session, there's a primary speaker field and then a speakers field.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, would there be any way to get training or lab licenses for meeting connector VMs so professionals can test them in their own labs?
I don't have an answer for that. You're going to want to talk to your account exec and have them engage their sales engineer.
Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas. Can the Zoom event be streamed to YouTube or only to the lobby?
With conferences in the GA release, they added the ability back for it to stream to a third party, but it can only stream to one place. And that's conferences specific.
And does it support RTMP when it's only one place?
Yeah. It's the same RTMP stream you're used to.
Right. So you could pass it to Restream.
You,
and then
you
send
can
it
go to
everything
Restream and then go out. Yeah. But what you couldn't do is you couldn't use Restream to get back to the lobby.
Right. Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, what would you think of Zoom accredited or Zoom approved production facilities where customers could work with them to produce their events?
Sounds like a cool idea. We're talking with some stuff internally to look at how a program might make sense.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, how do you enable audio and video watermarking?
Those are going to all be in the account settings. So the admin settings on zoom.us.
Next question.
And the last one in the queue today, Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany, says, any real localization planned? Europe data protection rules block many organizations from using Zoom, including schools.
Yeah, so Zoom has a lot of stuff already in place. This would be a good place to talk to your AE and get the sales engineer engaged, because they can talk all about the details of that localization specifically for, hey, I want to talk about Germany. I want to talk about EMEA. Because there's definitely ways to localize that data for universities, for education. We've figured this out. There's a lot of people using us there.
Sam, thank you so much for coming. Yep. It's really, really great to have you. So just fantastic. It really helps. I think that there was a lot of us talking about it and not really getting our head completely around what conferences and events are. And it really, really helped to have you here.
Absolutely. Let me know when that happens again. I'll be back.
We will. I think we need to have a regular. We might have to do this like once a month or whatever, where we just have Sam on to just answer Zoom questions. Are you open to that, Sam?
Yeah, that sounds like a plan.
All right. Okay. We'll work on that.
As long as you can accept the background, because
I will accept the background. I will talk about backgrounds in general, but not yours. So anyways,
negotiation.
Yeah. There we go. Very good. All right. Thanks so much, Sam. And thanks to our producers for great questions. 67 questions we went through today. So really, really great set of questions. And for our panelists, the big panel that showed up today, thank you so much for your contribution to the rest of the group. Really appreciate it. Remember that this afternoon we're doing at 2:00. We're going to have kind of an open session where we're just a lab of it's just going to be a bunch of us messing around with Isadora. So you're more than welcome to come and check it out for an hour. And then remember that tomorrow we have education at 8. We have cooking at 10. We have concerts at noon. It's a long day. It's got all kinds of things going on. That email that went out will tell you all about those things. All right. Now we're going to jump into after hours. Thanks, everybody.